Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Welcome to another episode of the HR Chat Show. Hello, listeners. This is your host today, Bill Banham. And in this episode, I'm joined by the awesome, wonderful, fantastic Mary Cullen, founder and managing director over at Insight HR. With more than 2 decades of experience advising organizations across Ireland, Mary has built a reputation as a trusted voice in HR strategy, workplace culture, and employee relations. Mary is also the host of the HR Room. If you haven't listened to it yet, I would strongly recommend it. It's awesome. It's Ireland's longest running HR podcast and leads a thriving community of HR professionals through regular events and insights. And in this conversation, listeners, we're going to focus on findings from Insight HR's Irish Workplace Bullying Report 2026, which is just landed, actually, as we're recording this. And we're going to unpack what the data tells us about the scale of workplace bullying today, why it remains an under-recognized organizational risk, and what HR leaders can realistically do to address it. And by the way, Mary will also be on stage at Disrupt Dublin in just a few weeks as we record this, along with her colleague and fellow podcast co-host, the awesome Dave Corkery. Mary, how are you doing? Welcome to the show today.
I'm great, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me, and what a lovely introduction.
So, as we like to do on this show, before we get into the hard-hitting stuff, Mary, what have I missed? Tell us a bit more about yourself and your career background.
Oh, wow. Well, I hate to say it, but in HR for over 25 years. I think it may be slightly longer, but I'm sticking with the 25 years anyway. Started very much as a generalist, worked in finance and tech before I left and set up my own HR consultancy, Insight HR. We're now one of the leading HR firms in Ireland, and we work with business in Ireland and the UK, but we also work with businesses who have operations, maybe France, Italy, US, wherever, that have Irish operations and need Irish specific advice for those operations. And we do everything. We do everything in the HR space other than health and safety, although what we're going to talk about today is a health and safety issue. We come at it from a HR perspective.
Very good. Thank you, Mary. I'd just like to add Insight HR supported our relaunch event in Dublin in February. They're supporting the event on May 21st as well, which is coming up in just a few weeks, as I mentioned. And listeners, they are a delight to work with. They're a lovely bunch of people. So I would strongly recommend checking them out. Okay, Mary, let's get into the hard-hitting questions now then. Let's start with... Let's start with the big picture. But based on your latest report then, how common are bullying complaints in Irish workplaces today?
They're very common. We just launched a survey and we asked more than 2,000 HR and business leaders across a wide sector in Ireland what their experiences have been with bullying, both personally and professionally, how often they've dealt with complaints themselves, how confident they are with dealing with those complaints, and what level of experience and training they have to actually deal with those complaints. And I hate to say it, but 85% of all the respondents have handled at least one bullying complaint in their career. Nearly half of those respondents have handled between 3 and 10 complaints. And that gives you an idea of the level and extent of bullying complaints that we see. And nearly 2/3 of all respondents have dealt with a complaint in the past 12 months. So what we're seeing is a trend where either the level of complaints that HR professionals and business leaders are dealing with have either stayed the same over the last 5 years or have actually increased. And that gives an indication of the level and extent of the problem there actually is. An organization like the World Health Organization categorizes bullying as workplace violence and see it as epidemic in a sense, in that it is so broad and it has such an impact on the health and the well-being of individuals that it's a world health issue, not just an Irish specific issue.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the HR Chat podcast. If you enjoy the audio content we produce, you'll love our articles on the HR Gazette. Learn more at hrgazette.com. And now, back to the show.
Okay, just a quick follow-up to that then. The term workplace violence, that sounds like quite a strong term. Can we maybe put some definition around what we mean by bullying here? So, for example, sometimes you get quite an assertive leader, someone who's pushy, very driven, got their own ideas about where a particular team should be going, and they're quite forceful. I guess the question is, when is pushy bullying?
Yeah, I mean, bullying is quite a specific thing in that it's repeated, inappropriate behavior that has the effect of undermining an individual's dignity in the workplace. And that, I guess, is the subject of a lot of controversy around what does that actually mean in real terms. So what might be a concrete example of bullying? A one-off incident typically isn't. So yes, you can have a pushy manager. Maybe it's a pushy manager who's complaining about your workplace performance, and maybe not all that subtle in how they're doing it, depending on the level of communication skills or people skills that they actually have. But unless there's an established pattern of inappropriate and repeated behavior that undermines dignity, and that's kind of a worldwide definition and approach to it, then it may not amount to bullying. In Ireland, we have some significant case law, and the bar in Ireland is extremely high when it comes to proving bullying in the workplace, and they have broken down that definition quite clearly. So those three elements must be part and parcel of what somebody is seeing. So a repeated pattern must be targeted. It must be directed at you as an individual, and it must have that, I guess, sinister element to it. It's not simply, I'm not happy with how you're performing at work, or I'm not a very nice person. In HR, we can't make people nice. If they're not nice, they're not nice. We can't influence that, but what we can do is influence what is acceptable within our workplaces, irrespective of the jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you very much. So, are complaint levels changing over time, Mary? Are we seeing an increase, a decline, or just better reporting? What does that look like?
Yeah, the problem isn't going away, and the majority of respondents that completed our survey, 55% feel that the level of bullying complaints in their organisation have either stayed the same or increased in the past 5 years. Only 14% had seen a decrease in complaints, and only 12% reported no complaints. So that's huge. That's huge. And a worrying sign, given how advanced Ireland is in terms of its code of practice on bullying, in terms of its definition around bullying, in terms of the level of case law around bullying. It's not improving, despite all these things being in place.
So when complaints are raised, Mary, what tends to happen next? And how does bullying influence retention and employee exits? And I guess I'd add to that, we talk a lot on this show about differences in the ways that different generations work. Are we seeing, for example, Gen Zers more likely to stand up and make complaints about the ways that they're being treated compared to, say, millennials or boomers or other generations?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that the majority of the complaints really don't come in from entry-level employees, although there is some level of entry-level complaints. Now, that might just be simply a confidence issue. Someone new to the workplace doesn't know what to expect, and doesn't understand necessarily what the treatment that they're receiving actually is. So we're not seeing, a massive amount of complaints at that entry level, which is where we would have our Gen Zs. We are seeing the majority of complaints being made against managers, supervisors, senior managers, rather than anybody else. And they tend to be coming from their direct reports, which kind of feeds back into your earlier question. What makes a manager a bully versus how does somebody manage an individual who they're not happy with, and or who isn't performing in some way, or whose conduct or behavior is out of sync with what the organization expects from them. And it's a fine line. And I have seen over the years, as being an experienced investigator myself, but I have also seen over the years that when people get accused, so you're the manager, you're being accused of something by maybe a direct report, people are genuinely shocked and stand back and say, I'm no bully. I'm not someone who bullies people in work. I've got a job of work to get done. And this person is a troublemaker. This person is someone who's got performance issues. This person is always moaning or complaining about something. Now I'm the target of something that they're doing. And that's why it gets so complicated and so difficult to actually resolve it.
And you mentioned earlier in one of your previous answers, the legislation in Ireland means that it's terribly difficult to prove bullying. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that actually it's easier to be the accused than it is to be the accuser in terms of getting a result?
No, I wouldn't think so. And, to be honest, I've seen the mental health of both the accuser and the accused deteriorating over the course of an investigation, because it's extremely stressful if you're accused of bullying someone, but it's also extremely stressful if you're the recipient of inappropriate behavior. I cast my mind back years ago to my very first HR job, where I was in a standalone position, and another manager made very clear to me day one when I started with the company that she had interviewed for the role I took, and the management team hadn't allowed her to move from the role she was in into the role she wanted, because she was too valuable to the organization where she was. And following that, she repeatedly undermined me as a young person in front of the management team through CCing all and sundry. She'd ask a question, I'd give an answer, she'd come back and disagree, but she'd CC all the management team in her disagreed answer, so on and so forth. And there were many, many examples of that kind of behavior towards me. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what was actually happening, but I became obsessed with working harder, doing better, performing and working longer hours, obsessed talking about this particular individual at home, and it having a serious impact on my confidence, my well-being, my ability to do my job. And I consider myself a pretty hardy person, and because a lot of people in HR are hardy people, but that doesn't mean you're immune to someone targeting you for whatever reason they have themselves. Did I ever complain? No. Did I ever raise an issue with my manager? No. But I did plan my exit from that organization with the view that for me, it was unsustainable to continue working in an environment where I felt my whole confidence was beginning to be undermined. It's quite serious when it comes to people. And like I say, I have watched people over time and seen their mental health deteriorate. And, it's not a pretty sight. I've seen people lose their hair. I've seen people lose weight, not able to sleep, relationships break up. I've seen all sorts of things in this sphere.
Yeah, I mean, I personally can completely relate. When I was in my early 20s, starting my career, I had a couple of bosses who I guess I look back now and I describe them as bullies, and it affected things like losing weight, not sleeping. Felt like I had to be in the office until 10 o'clock at night sometimes. now I'm a bit of an old codger. I would never allow myself to be in that kind of situation again. Absolutely not. But you look back now, don't you? With,
You do.
with a different perspective. So, from your experience, where do organisations most often fall short when handling bullying issues?
Yeah. So when we asked the respondents about things like policy and training and their complaint handling and maybe informal resolution mechanisms, the vast majority of respondents actually had a policy in place around workplace bullying. And so that was 94%. And I wasn't surprised by that, because often in HR, we think, let's develop a policy and make sure that we have a good, robust policy in place. And then we'll just leave it sit there on our internal networks, or we might print a booklet, or we might train people at induction around workplace bullying. But surprisingly, 38% of respondents said their organization doesn't conduct any training that addresses workplace bullying at all, not even at induction, and not for management, not for HR, and not for anyone in the organization, so that they could understand at what point their behavior might become inappropriate. And of those that do conduct training, 62% said it only happens at induction, with only 44% conducting training at regular intervals. And while HR people and business leaders recognize that their organizations needed to provide additional support or guidance for managers to handle conflict earlier, they aren't doing that. Over 54% said that they're not actually doing that. So that'll give you, I suppose, a sense of how this whole area is underinvested in. So if you go back to the World Health Organization describing workplace bullying as a health and safety issue, it is well known and documented in Ireland, for example, that it's a health and safety issue. But unlike something where, you're operating machinery, or you're operating equipment, or you're sitting at a desk, or you're looking at a computer screen for hours of the day, organizations are taking those physical health and safety issues much more seriously than they're taking an issue that could affect someone's psychological safety, their mental health, and their well-being, and also having an impact maybe on their physical health too. And if you think about that, it doesn't make a lot of sense in the context of health and safety of our people in our workplaces if we don't invest in it, we don't think about it, we don't train people, we don't train managers, we don't train individuals around, well, what is inappropriate behavior? Because you and I, Bill, may both be HR professionals, but we've both grown up in different home environments. We will have seen different things. You may come from a family that has a joking culture, and I don't. And you say things to me that I find offensive, or repeatedly do something that you think is banter, good fun, a bit of crack, and yet my mental health is starting to deteriorate because of the way in which you're treating me. And that just gives an example of the wide variety of things that can constitute bullying. And I guess the danger zones for managers and individuals, because the last thing anyone wants to be accused of is bullying someone. It damages your reputation. It damages your standing within an organization. It causes you stress and distress. And we are seeing that most people who are either accused of bullying or accusing tend to leave the organization after an investigation or after a complaint has been made.
We've rightfully mentioned so far, we've highlighted the fact that bullying in the workplace can affect performance levels. I wonder, from the research that you guys have done, from the conversations that you've had, is there any correlation in terms of when the reports of bullying come up? Are they related to performance? What I mean by that is, if you've got an employee and they know that they've got a performance review coming up, for example, in the next couple of months, and they know that their performance has been
Yeah.
down over the last little while, are they more likely to make a complaint around bullying, whether or not that's an honest complaint?
Yeah, in my career to date, and look, we have a specialist division at Insight HR that carries out workplace investigations, and I think Susie Lowe, one of my colleagues, did the talk at the last Disrupt Dublin around workplace investigations and gathering evidence. In our experience, it's really rare to find that someone made a malicious complaint. And that it was based on something as simple as, not wishing to get negative feedback at a performance review. Often at pressure points in an organization. So say, for example, there's a downsizing or a restructuring or a disciplinary process or something that an employee is finding deeply uncomfortable. You might see complaints being raised at that point in time. But from an investigator's perspective, we will always be looking at, has someone made this in good faith, or is this a malicious complaint? Every single manager, every single person who's ever been accused of bullying tells me and my team when we investigate it that they're innocent. A bit like people, I guess, who go to jail too. Everybody's innocent. And yet it's our job to establish fact. Has something actually occurred which falls into the definition of bullying? Or is something unpleasant happening in the workplace, such as you're feeling under pressure because you are in trouble, and that in itself is not considered bullying and is well documented, certainly in Irish law, as not being bullying. So you can't stop someone raising a complaint. You've got to address it once it arises. But in our experience, training managers, training employees, far from increasing the number of complaints, it actually reduces and acts as a preventative measure, because we all understand what we can and can't do in the workplace.
Okay, very good. So beyond policies and procedures then, what does it really take to build and sustain a respectful, psychologically safe workplace culture? And maybe as part of your answer, I'd be keen to hear from you. Does that start with, is it as early as the hiring process? So, for example, is it important to identify possible bullies, folks who perhaps don't fit with the company culture during that initial interview process?
Yeah, of course, it's important that you vet people carefully. But what I find when it comes to bullying and in organizations where bullying is prevalent, so of course you might deal with isolated incidents of bullying or bullying complaints, but in organizations where there's that culture of bullying, they tend to support and reward and progress certain types of behaviors that are acceptable to the organization or are acceptable to leadership. So yes, it does start at recruitment, but it depends on your leadership, its approach to something like bullying, and whether or not, and I see this all the time in policies, this word zero tolerance. I'm sure you've seen it yourself, Bill. We take a zero tolerance approach to bullying, which is wonderful. But what does it actually mean in reality? And if you ask any HR person, what's a zero tolerance approach to bullying? You'd be surprised that actually they don't have a zero tolerance approach to bullying, that sometimes you're actually recognizing, rewarding, and encouraging that kind of behavior. Why? Because it gets work done. Why? Because you're the best salesperson in the organization. You're bringing in millions. Why am I going to support a junior report who's complaining about your behavior towards them when you're a top performer in the organization? And in some cases, that's where we see those kind of behaviors not only tolerated, but also rewarded and encouraged.
Oh, now see, that's interesting. In a past life, I worked for a big sales association over in Canada, and you just mentioned if you're a salesperson,
Yeah.
are there certain departments which are more susceptible to bullying complaints? So, sales department, for example, we probably can have a lot of extroverts. You probably have a lot of people who are working under a lot of pressure, and they probably care about the ROI. They care about the results. with more minutiae, with more focus, perhaps, than a more chilled HR department. Do you guys see anything like that?
No, I don't see any particular patterns, other than I do know that the majority of complaints made tend to come at managers. So it tends to be the CEO, the senior leaders, the heads of departments, the supervisors, the management layer. And sometimes, when you look at these things, I'm quite stunned by what managers might say to individuals in terms of how they treat them, or shouting at people, or disrespectful behaviour in some way. But again, even if I shout at you once, Bill, if I lose my cool now, lose my temper with you, shout at you on this podcast, and you're my direct report, it might be very unpleasant for you. You might feel pretty humiliated and angry with me. But that one-off event is not bullying. And from a HR perspective, you would be dealing with Mary's inappropriate behavior on a live podcast, which let's hope I never get there. But you'd be dealing with that kind of behavior under maybe your discipline policy, but you wouldn't be looking at that as bullying. Even though I was humiliated, undermined, disrespected, hurt, angered, embarrassed, just because it's a one-off event, it means it's not bullying. So we did see from our survey that a lot of the respondents showed a high level of confidence in their ability to handle a bullying complaint. 63% said they were confident or highly confident in all areas of complaint management. And the majority said that they have actually conducted workplace investigations. 71% said that, even though only 56% of the same group said they had received any training in how to do it. And of all the areas where people said they struggled or identified struggling, it was in the area of report writing, with only 29% of the respondents saying that they didn't struggle with any aspect of the investigation. And I know, as someone who's conducted more of these investigations than the majority of people, that there are some investigations that you really and truly will struggle with. There's bias, objectivity, independence, report writing, interviewing skill. There's all these areas of specialist skill. And if you don't train people on how to conduct an investigation, then how are you going to just know how to do it naturally?
Let's finish off with a takeaway from our listeners. I think that's always important. If you could leave HR listeners and HR leaders and business executives who are listening to this episode today with one immediate practical action to reduce workplace bullying risk, what would that be, Mary?
It would be about training managers. It's the one thing I would do. If I had a very limited budget and I couldn't get to training the whole organization, which in the ideal world, yeah, that's what you do. You train everyone from your board, your CEO, your leadership team, your management team, and all your employees. You'd have awareness campaigns running, and you'd regularly train the whole organization. Let's say your budget's really limited and you can't get the buy-in to do all of that, because let's be fair, it costs money to do it. I would train your managers. I would train them. I would make sure that they understood clearly what behaviors are and are not acceptable from themselves first in the workplace, and then to look at, well, what do we do when we get a complaint? How should we handle it? And what should we do? If something's complex, if it involves the CEO, I tell you what, all internal HR teams run away from it, because let's be fair, do you want to do an investigation on the CEO and find that the CEO is a bully? Absolutely not. There's very few HR people I know that would be brave enough to do it. And so some investigations just get outsourced automatically, simply because of the level of complexity involved in them. But if you want to avoid getting there in the first place, train your people, and all of your people. And that's the best preventative strategy you can take. Policy alone doesn't do it, although you have to have the policy in place.
Mary, that just leads me to say for today, thank you very much for being my guest on this episode of the HR Chat Show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the HR Chat Show. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and listen to some of the hundreds of episodes published by HR Gazette? And remember, for what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.